If you want to know how to catch more bass using the drop shot technique, I'm here to help. My name is Wesley Littlefield with YourBassGuy.com, and today it's all about the drop shot technique. Honestly, I tend to steer away from the drop shot, and it's not because it doesn't catch bass. Actually, the opposite is true. I'd probably catch a lot more if I'd actually use it more, but I don't use it because I don't have the patience for it. It's a very slow finesse technique. Most of the time, I'm just looking to cast and reel it back in, not sit there and dabble with like a drop shot. So I'm gonna slow down for this video and I'm gonna show you everything that you need to know about getting started, a few techniques, all that stuff is coming right up. All right, so the drop shot. I've got my leader pretty short today. If you don't know how to rig it or whatever, I will have a video linked down below, as well as at the end of the video, this video here, where I show you exactly how to rig it and talk a little bit about fishing it. But this video is strictly about fishing the drop shot. Most of the time I don't fish a drop shot, mainly because I fish like a pond like this. It's not very big. Sometimes, you know, the pond's a little bit bigger or whatever, but it doesn't really get that deep. And so I don't think about fishing a drop shot, because generally speaking, a drop shot is like a deeper technique. But that's not actually the case that I've found out as I've started to fish the drop shot much more in different locations. So one technique that works whether you're fishing shallow or deep is literally just casting it and let it set to the bottom. And then you're gonna do what we call dead sticking, or letting the bait set there. And you're literally just gonna let the bait set there. You're gonna cast it out, let it sink, and then reel up your slack a little bit, and then maybe bounce a little bit, but then you're just gonna let it set there. And what's happening is the tension in your line when you reel it up is pulling that lure off of the bottom. So it's just kind of sitting there, kind of minding its own business, and your weight is on the bottom. So you can still feel a little bit, and you actually feel when that fish hits it, but it's really boring. Like I said, I mean, you're literally not doing anything. I mean, sitting here, reeling it super slow if you're reeling it at all. I mean, you might even be dragging it back to you a little bit, and you can tell that the wind is actually blowing my line a little bit, so I've got to keep constant little pressure on it. Oh, well, he bit that one. I gotta go put on the, he did not get the hook, but you can tell he bit it. All right, so I got another worm. I actually downsized this time, and hopefully that'll make the difference. Clearly, one thing I did not do that I should have done was actually let him run with it for a second and let him really get it in, because the way you hook a drop shot, at the very nose of that soft plastic, whatever you're using, you really got to give it time for that fish to actually inhale that bait. Where that time I got all excited and happy, set the hook too soon, and just ripped the bait off instead of actually getting the fish. So I've downsized a little bit, and maybe that'll lead to the fish inhaling it a little bit better and me getting a little better hook set this time. We'll see. Back to the technique. So we're dead sticking it super slow. The next one, we can actually move it a little bit faster, and that's popping it off the bottom like so, and letting it sink back down, reel up your slack, and pop it off the bottom. And I don't know if you can see that through that water, because it's pretty nasty, but when I pop it, I mean, that bait just pops up for a second and jerks back down, and it looks like a really, it kind of reminds me of a leech coming up and then going back down to the bottom, which bass will eat, or a worm or whatever, you know. But you're just gonna pop it and let it sink back down the bottom and reel up your slack. You know, this is gonna be one of the faster techniques, because you're doing a lot more, and so you're really gonna wanna do popping it like when they're a little bit more active. You know, if it's the heat of the day or whatever, I really probably wouldn't think about popping it. I would be dead sticking it, slow dragging it, that kind of stuff. All right, for the last technique that we'll talk about is actually dragging it. Unlike dead sticking it, where you're gonna sit there and just do nothing, I'm actually just gonna slowly bring this up. I'm hitting something. And then let it sink back down. I move the lure slowly with my rod. I'm not reeling to move the lure. I'm moving it with my rod. And this will help keep that bottom contact with your weight and hopefully keep your lure, your soft plastic, whatever you want to call it, in the strike zone right there along the bottom. And this is kind of a in-between technique of dead sticking it and popping it. As you can tell, you know, popping it would be a much quicker motion, whereas dead sticking it here would, you know, you'd just be sitting here not doing anything, and then in the middle, you know, you've got a nice slow drag. It's really important, no matter what technique you're doing, that you don't have a lot of slack in your line, like especially when you're dragging it like this. I mean, I've got, look, I'll let it down. There is a ton of slack in my line. So if a fish was to bite it right now, there is no way I could reel down and set the hook on that fish. So specifically, really, when you're dragging it, you don't want to have too much slack to where you will miss that bite. I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth on where to fish a drop shot, or where I fish a drop shot, let's say. You know, I tend to stick more shallow fishing, so I don't do a lot of deep fishing. And by deep, I mean, you know, if it's over 12 foot plus, that's usually about as deep as I go fishing just about anything. But the drop shot really shines when you hit that 10 to 12 foot range, and that's where I would fish it. Now, like I said, I've started to fish it a little shallower and started to have some success with it, you know, shallower than 12 feet. So I'm not saying you can't have success in shallow water, but it was originally intended for deeper water. Now you can see one way I turn it into shallow water technique is by actually running my leader a little bit shorter. You know, you can have a longer leader up to 2 foot if you wanted to, I guess. So I run a shorter leader, especially when fishing in the shallows, and it seems to do pretty well for me. Now, the kind of place that I'm looking to throw this, I really don't like throwing it into grass or heavy cover or anything. You can see that there's grass all along the edge of the pond and stuff. And so I'll throw it up along the edge of it, but I'm not gonna throw it into it because it has that exposed hook, and more than likely I'm gonna end up getting snagged and having to pull it out, or pull out part of that grass or whatever it is. So I tend to stay away from grass. You can actually see the top of my artificial brush piles here, and I'll cast near them and around them with it, but it also, just the way that hook and that weight are, if you cast directly into it, sometimes that hook and the weight can get all twisted up and tangled up around some stuff. The drop shot technique is not really a great technique when there's a lot of stuff to get hung around. Now, like along the edge of docks and stuff, I would definitely throw this just because there's not as much. Now, of course, there's always wires, there's always brush piles that people throw out on docks and stuff, but generally you can get away with throwing this in those areas. I actually really like throwing a drop shot along the rocks. That's one of my favorite places. Or like this has a muddy, silty bottom, so I'll throw the drop shot here because it keeps it up out of the rocks. That weight kind of makes a sound that kind of gets the fish's attention, and then your lure is up above the bottom so the fish can see it and come and hit it. And so that's why two of my favorite places to throw a drop shot are muddy bottoms, silty kind of bottoms like this pond, and rocky areas, rocky flats, rocky humps, anything like that. Those are two of the best places, I think, to throw a drop shot. Now, a lot of guys will see standing timber, whether it's completely submerged or it's out, it's visible or not visible. Go and throw it up next to that. That's another great place to throw it because it's less likely to get hung up in those situations, and that tends to be where fish hang out. So that's another reason why it's so good in those situations. Got him. Yeah, I let him run with that one. Well, there it is. As you can tell, the drop shot works, even in ponds, even in shallow ponds. It's an excellent, excellent lure technique to learn and put in your arsenal, because I proved myself wrong today that even boring fishing, slow fishing catches fish, which I knew. I just don't like doing it, but clearly I need to do it more often to catch more fish. If you guys like this video, or if you want to know how to actually rig the drop shot, I've got it down below. Feel free to check it out. Other than that, always remember that education is important, fishing, now that's essential. I'll catch you next time.